Okay, here, so I'll give you a take on how I design my plots. So with that being said, we have these little dots all over the places. These little lines represent transitions. The size of the dots are actually the size and severity of the event. We got the reprieve up there, and bam, outro. So with that being said, bam, we'll start right there. So first, I understand the plots I already know, the classic tropes, and we move forward into the exposition. That is the first glimpse of what you're writing, of what you're doing, of a video. It could be setting the tone, descriptive words. Now we move into the next part. Oh, the main character can be introduced at this point, perhaps suddenly, really depends. But it is the very beginning. Now next is the classic pure introduction. So with that being said, the main character is established, and at this point, secondary characters are also established. Then, bam, this line right here represents the inciting incident, okay? It's the incident that incites the whole entire plot. So with that being said, this thick little line right here is the transition from that inciting incident. Perhaps the character is trying to understand what's going on in the situation here in this transition, and finally moves forward into the first stage of the plot. Now I like to keep my first plot stage basically crescendo, moving from intensity from here, bam, to there. So with that being said, a pow. This is where kind of like I want to bring into the motivations of the character, and we're going to see exactly how that plays out in the new situation they're finding themselves in at this point. Now, bam, next is the middle of the first plot stage, where we're understanding exactly what is happening to the character in the first steps of the story, and this is setting the tone for the rest of the plot stages. And here we have the first initial conflict. And with this being said, this is the big conflict that the character either has to resolve or maybe perhaps just escape from. And this is the transition where they would move on to the second plot stage. So during the second plot stage, I like to make things basically light. And at this point, the character within and of itself should basically be, how can I say this? Developing, changing. It should basically be reflecting how the character was before, but at the same time, seeing how the story so far is actually changing the character to its core. Now we got a second reprieve, which is basically just kind of summing down what has happened before, what has happened thus far, until bam, we got the second plot stage conflict. And after this conflict is resolved, this is the transition to the third and final stage. And this needs to be a big transition. Okay, so by now in this third plot stage, we should see some interesting things happen. So with that being said, we have seen the character change thus far, and now I feel like this is usually where a sacrifice comes in, or punishment, or basically like an obstacle that forces the character to change. And with that being said, that happens between this transition. Now the character might be, let's say, getting angry. This is a transitionary decrescendo into what will eventually end up as the climax. And with this being said, this is kind of like a decision-making point, and how the party or the person or how the plot in general is going to move forward and transition softly and smoothly into the final encounter. Alright, cool. So next we're in the position of the plot climax. So with this being said, we have a transition here that would probably indicate a reprieve, like basically a quiet time before the final event happens, which is here. And this is what I like to do, is like a kind of like a fake out. So with that being said, you pretend that this will be the final climax, but I left it hollow because it's a trick. And the final climax happens here. Now, use the plot person can either A, end it happy, or B, end it sad. Depending on the circumstances, this transition right here will define how the story ends. So although this is the high point, this is a lot for some people the most important point right here. Where it decides what happens in the story. And now finally we have the falling action, the decrescendo of the plot. Here is basically the aftermath of what happened here on the climax. So with this being said, this is kind of the area where you explore what happened, like you explore what you learned, for example, a recap of what's going on, and also how the story is going to move forward to this transition. And with this being said, this is kind of like, it could be a parting of ways, or a documentation of the journey, or the plot. Basically the point between, okay, this climax, this final event is done. Okay, we can finally move on, and solidifies that this is moving forward. Now here we have the conclusion of the story. Here is the transition from the final separation of the final event, and here is where basically it gives hints at what the world is going to look like moving forward, what the world used to look like, or how the world for the protagonist, antagonist, or other people in the story is going to look like moving forward. And the outro is what I like to call this, is basically just the ending aesthetic. Kind of like how the... Sorry, camera died. Yeah, so this is the outro, which is not to be confused with the conclusion. Okay, this is basically a little spice at the end, like kind of like the ending aesthetic of how the author or the director wanted the reader or the viewer to feel. You know, kind of like basically ending the story in a way that makes sense or doesn't make sense, in a skewity or perhaps full conclusion. Anyways, it's kind of the fade out. So I hope you learned something. This is how I plot out some of my plots. I follow my little guide of the plot pyramid, and I go with the plots that I currently use, or they're typically called tropes. Okay, so what I can do is rapidly picture this in the background of that. And basically I like to kind of like improv these thinking patterns into the back of my habitual imagination. So I like to think of what could be a good underdog story. Then I follow the precise plot pattern, and bam, let's try the next one. Maturity, riddle, temptation, pursuit. Think of new characters. Oh, you know what? I'll do a character construction video next. Alright, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much. Have a great day. I hope I could have brought value to you, and I hope it did. Yeah. Have a good one.